Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 541st New Social Environment. I'm Eleanor, the program's assistant here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Dewey Crumpler and Amanda Gluibizzi. We are also thrilled to welcome poet Keith Donnell Jr. here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges that Black Lives Matter and that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and the Shinnecock Indian Nation. We encourage you to check the chat in a moment for a living document of resources and actions. Over the past 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has undertaken a miraculous journey, bringing together in a single monthly publication, art, music, dance, film, theater, and literature, along with thoughtful and social and political meditations. As a small nonprofit, we do need your support, and your contribution will support our writers, guest artists, production staff, and all of our operations here at the Rail. So please check the chat for information to donate as well. And now to introduce today's guest and host. Artist Dewey Crumpler is an associate professor of painting at the San Francisco Art Institute. His current work examines issues of globalization, cultural co-modification through the integration of digital imagery, video, and traditional painting techniques. Formerly associate professor at Ohio State University, Amanda Gluibizzi is the founding co-director of the New Foundation of Art History and is an art scene editor for the Brooklyn Rail. She specializes in mid and late 20th century art, design, and urbanism in the United States, Europe, and Latin America. Thank you both so much for joining us, and I will now turn the mic over to you, Amanda.
Great, thank you so much, Eleanor, and thank you everyone for being here today. One of the things that Dewey has mentioned to me and Eleanor several times is that he likes to listen to our new social environments while he's in the studio. And so I want to say a particular hello and welcome to all of you who work while we talk. That makes me so proud and so happy to be a part of your process. Wow, what an honor for us. What we're going to do today is look at two exhibitions that are running concurrently, one at the Richmond Art Center in California and one at Derek Eller Gallery here in New York. And we'll talk a little bit about the works that are in them and also some of the motifs that Dewey has used throughout his career. And Eleanor and I are particularly keen on actually asking Dewey to talk about his process too. So we're really excited about that. I won't get in as much to his early work because that has been covered by the Rail recently in a print interview that ran in the fall. But if you have questions for him about that, please stick around for the end. And so you can ask him questions, for example, about his mural career. So Eleanor, I'm going to ask you to start the slideshow. And Dewey, thank you so much for speaking with us and thank you for being here with us today.
Well, thank you, Amanda. And thank the Rail. I can't tell you how wonderful it is to be in conversation actually in the space rather than observing the space as I work in my studio. And secondly, there's so many people who are responsible for this moment getting here. Particularly Fong, who I think has made an extraordinary thing happen for the community at large by providing a forum where artists and thinkers can talk about the creative process in depth without sound bites. And in that way has provided a great service to history. and I'm very interested in history. And secondly, I'd like to thank those people who helped to get that work here. That is the Derek Eller Gallery, Jordan Stein, Dan and Sam, and also Jenkins Johnson Gallery for providing the work that is at the Richmond Arts Center. And so those are people I think are really important to this process and to my process. And therefore, I thank all of you and you for your patience, Amanda, for all that stuff I was trying to get together. So thank you.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure. So what we're looking at here is an image from your show that's up at the Richmond Arts Center. Again, this is Richmond, California. So if you're on that coast, go and see this exhibition. It's called Crossings. What is the meaning of the title here for you?
This work, which is about the container series that I've been working on in conjunction with the work we're talking about at the Ella Gallery for about 30 years. And it came out of my interest in marine painting and shipping. I spent a lot of time in the Oakland piers walking around, and after a while, looking at those great ships and that extraordinary environment and being saturated in the sounds and movements in that environment, I started to think about shipping and its history. And the seas are a primary component that made modernism possible. And what I was looking at, all of those great, monstrous looking ships, flanked by cranes that began to look to me like Trojan horses. And I thought, there must be something going on with my coming down here that I need to explore. And so after a few years, I started doing plein air paintings of ships. And then I came to New York, where my son was staying, and we went to the Philadelphia Museum. And while at the Philadelphia Museum, I saw these extraordinary Turners, which is why I went. And I saw among these magnificent paintings, his great piece on the slave ship. And when I came back to my studio, I thought, okay, now I know why I'm attracted to these forms. Because just as the tulip paintings I was working on, they really are about the economy that reinforced the conditions of slavery, and that process made possible the modern world, the very thing I'm standing in, and the efficiency with which these ships are moving goods and services around the world. And so that's why crossing in time, crossing in space, the idea of crossing over, crossing through time, all of that is what that title means for me. I'm not great on titles, but that one made sense to me.
I'm really interested in this idea of the crossing of time, both our connectivity to the founding of this nation. I'm thinking specifically, of course, about the 1619 Project and the way that it's really brought this to the fore, particularly for people who hadn't been thinking very critically about slavery and the way that it develops the founding of our nation. But also then too, your connectivity to painters of the past, going back and forth, back and forth. I think that this is a really, really fascinating way of thinking about a crossing.
Yes, you know, we are crossing all the time. We're crossing the streets. We're crossing the way we perceive ourselves. You know, we're always in a state of change. The dynamics of our life are reflected in the things we bring into the world, psychic stuff that we bring into the world. So that became really important in this exploration of these forms.
Mhm. With the piece that we were just looking at on the screen, sorry about that, Eleanor, could you go back, please? Are these individual works that have been placed in this grid formation, or is this a single work?
Well, this is a selection of hundreds of moments over many years. I would come into the studio and bring with me whatever I carried from the experience out at the piers. And I would constantly make these vignette feelings, putting them into these grid paintings. They really were not originally conceived of as a grid, but over time it made sense to me because there were hundreds of them. And so every day I would make 4 or 5 of them, sometimes more. And they were trying to understand this box, this containment vehicle that travels around the world in this system.
So essentially what we're looking at then is a ship carrying the containers itself.
Yes,
Each
yes,
vignette then tells its own story.
yes. They you know are these twisting and turnings through time that these systems of economic, cultural, and uh, and spiritual control have operated within these systems, and so these mark a relationship to systems of travel, systems of containment, because these boxes are filled with goods or something that we have no clue to.
Mm-hmm.
And that rather marked for me how ships contain ideas. They carry across the world ideas, and interactions come out of those ideas, and systems are shaped in relationship to those movements and connections that they create. So that's sort of how that grid was playing in my mind.
Mm-hmm. In the catalog essay for the Richmond Art Center show, the author talks too about the potential relationship between the container ship as we think of it today and that particularly brutal illustration of slave ships and the way that slave ships were the way they housed the people that were being brought from Africa over to the United States. And so here too, we might think about this grid if we were wanting to think about it abstractly, but if we don't want to rely on abstraction, then also thinking too about individual narratives, individual stories, individual beliefs, individual personalities within each cell of the grid. And so here too, we can see this relationship that you're talking about across time.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it, that every piece is a moment in the mind of an inhabitant inside that vehicle. That is to say that the mind can shape itself, focus itself to be outside of the trauma that it's having to deal with, so that it can deal with that trauma.
These are interesting paintings because they veer very, very close to abstraction. But if we look at your bigger shipping container paintings, excuse me, they have a play between abstraction and naturalism, representation. So Eleanor, maybe we can move into some of these bigger paintings so that we can talk about that too. Do you feel a sense of abstraction and the tension then between representation working in these paintings?
Well, you know, since I first started painting, I worked in several modes. I've never worked in one mode because for me, the ideas are the denominator that articulates my experience. So for me, I could be painting murals and go home and make the abstract work that I was making primarily in my studio. And for the cultural apparatus that's been shaped in dichotomy, that looks like it's uneven. But for makers, it's in the same mode of thinking, and this work is. And the four ways in which my work is expressing itself over this 30-year period that we're looking at, it has operated in these modalities, of which the realism or naturalism is one aspect of it, because it registers the world we're in, the place that we are engaged in, where economics and power play an extraordinary role. And the planet is often the victim of this hubris, which the human condition has developed in relationship to it, because we have formed a culture that sees nature in one category and human beings in a more advantaged category, that of a caretaker. And many cultures express their relationship to the earth as being in one with the earth, not taking care of the earth, but being inside the earth. And that's interesting and important to me. So these images that are realistic are engaged in the process of commerce and moving politics, and in the way that for me that happens is in the realm of memetics. You know, the memetic tradition brings that into focus. The more spiritual tradition is that which is outside of it. And in that case, abstraction serves my purpose far greater than memeticism. But I've always used memeticism when I'm talking about something concrete, like the world we live in.
Mm-hmm.
So.
This painting strikes me as being fairly surrealistic, actually. The idea of bananas all over a beach. And particularly also the sky that you're painting, which feels very Magritte to me. Like thinking about how we might develop a surrealistic image. Do you find that there are aspects of the absurd in these paintings that you like to explore?
Yeah, well, you picked it up. I'm very interested in these works in the absurd. And if you pay attention to them, it reveals itself. It's about these mimetic works are about power, no doubt, economic, uh, 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 cultural power. And art is always central to these works. If you look at this work, for example, you way in the background, Duchamp's urinal is buried in the sand because as commerce services goods and needs, demands and needs, it brings the ideas that also fertilize new horizons. And modernity has had a profound effect on shores all over the world. So when these objects of commerce fall upon the landscape, they bring goods, including idea goods, the goods of ideas, the things that help to shape the way the world functions throughout its history. And absurdity, crabs and Lego toys becoming housing for hermit crabs, all of that, bananas with all of their suggestive history is absolutely essential. So there is a kind of absurdity that the mode of operation, the use of shiny materials respond to the deflection process that power uses to keep one from paying attention to the real subject. So dangling shiny stuff in someone's face can be confused for spiritualism when it's really just material that is happening.
This is a wonderful way to move to the next image, Eleanor, number 5. As you were talking about the crabs, I was realizing that, of course, crabs walk sideways, right? They don't walk forward and back. And
Right.
so, of course, when we're in the gallery, we're the crabs, right? We move sideways, laterally between the images that we're looking at. And so essentially that banana painting also is a crazy self-portrait or a crazy portrait of your viewer.
Yeah, yeah, that's wonderful. You know, that's great. I didn't think of that, but that's right on the time. But a painting like this, for example, um, in that Turner painting, you know, you don't mess with skies or water after Turner, because if you make a sky after Turner made those magnificent knee-bending paintings, you're in trouble. So for me, that light that is a double entendre became really important. So how do you get that light? Well, the only way to get that light and still make the statement you're after is you have to go to icon paintings, those paintings that are absolutely beautiful and alluring. And they use the greatest, most important symbol, which is God's light in the form of gold that reflects light. And it also carries spiritualism, this idea of the spirit say, in the context of capitalism, the spiritual is the market, the economy, the money that makes itself available through distraction to the wealthy. And so in this piece, when you look at it at first, it looks like a ship with its containers falling off. And then it could be bullion, gold. And then when you look more closely at the suds of the ocean banging against those structures, economic systems are inside that churning reality. And if you look very closely, it says Hayek, which is, of course, an economist by the name of Friedrich Hayek, who was a free market economist that believed markets should be unrestrained. And his acolytes, like Milton Friedman, was adopted by the Reagan administration in order to reinforce the idea of free market capitalism. And on the right side is the free market. And then in the center is Keynesian economics. And those systems of economic flow is what this painting is about. Which of those systems are going to carry us into the oblivion that is possible if the market has its way? So for me, I wanted this work to have both spiritual connotations, both from a beauty point of view, and then market connotations from the point of view of absolute wealth, as suggested by the color gold, the only real God in the capitalist modality. So that painting is about that for me, but I tried to make it complex enough that you have to work at it and you can put your own ideas in it. And so I don't talk about these works often, but for the rail, I will.
I was really struck in looking at this image that it's calling to mind to me the composition of the Raft of the Medusa, but it's taking the heroism of that painting and basically just like having all of it just kind of fall into the sea, right? It's all for naught. It's something else entirely. And of course, it would be a fool's goal to try to grab bullion bars from a cascade going into the ocean, right? You die trying.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I mean, there it is. The point is, bring your information to it. Every painting requires your information. Most people would never look close enough to, or even know who Hayek is, or Keynes, or free markets, let alone make it out in the complicated sea. But your reading is a spot on one, and one that I'm happy the work is communicating.
This one has gold leaf affixed to it, but in some of your other paintings, you're using silver leaf, including some that are at Derek Eller. So if people are on the East Coast and they want to see them in life, there are a few silver leaf pieces. Gold leaf shouldn't tarnish, but what about silver leaf?
Well, silver certainly tarnishes, but it's cleaned up beautifully.
Okay.
And, you know, the point of these paintings is a flash, that they flash and that they reflect light, and the light follows you. Wherever you go, the light goes. So there's an implication in the work of your participation in the work. And so this work, all these container paintings are about relationships to power. And I mean that in all of its dimensions. So that use of materialism, reflective materials, was important to this work, because this work is in the realm of of a kind of reality. The other works are released from that.
In the next image that we can see, this is a great image to look at because it makes it really clear that you have a collage practice as well as a strict painterly practice. And so I was curious to ask you about this too. How do you know when a piece needs to be collage?
Well, when the piece needs a physicality that the surface alone cannot manifest. That is, you can make a surface manifest anything you wish, but when the surface and your mind are focused on something that the physicality of can animate a body, like your proximity to this image is heightened when you see the marking, which reveals one mode of experience. But then the subtext of the works that I'm interested in, all of them, the thing that brought me to the ports was the beauty of shadows that are cast on the ships, how shadows work. And remember that when you see shadows, you see time. And time is the operative mode of my inquiry. That all these objects, all these iterations are related to memory, to time. And time lives in shadows. And so the very protrusion into space that this ship carries is a reflection of the relationship between its time signature, which is history, the very instrument that made the system that we live in, the economic system, possible. Insurance, navigation, the movement of goods and services, high castes and low castes. All of this comes out of time. And therefore, objects cast shadows. And those shadows become deeply important in my work. Just like this work carries the time signature of both Buddhist traditions and the traditions of poetry as articulated by Bob Kaufman. So Kaufman poetic sayings and statements are embedded in the flowers that protrude in and out of this space, because the space is animated by Black thought. And that's why these paintings keep focusing on time as Black thought, like a lotus, operates from a singularity into a multiplicity. And so these objects which refuse the Greenbergian flatness that I was taught was so important to painting, now moves into space, which is where Black thought had to move in order to deal with the capture culture it was resisting. That's why that got on there.
It's a new way of thinking about painting as a time-based medium. One of the things that you said in your rail interview is you said, African Americans are not in my work manipulated, they are active. Again, time. In that particular work, they are always engaged in action with agency. They do not belong to any time. They are timeless.
That's right. And that's particular of the hoodies. The hoodie.
Shall we move to them?
Well, I would like to, yeah, we could, yes, of course, we can move fluidly, not linearly. So I'm all for it.
All right. So this is the last image from the container series that Dewey's included for us. And so here we're seeing sneakers that have spilled out onto this beach. And this is really, really interesting because we're seeing this looping parabola shape that then shows up in your other paintings. So it has a very nice relationship to the hoodie works.
Wonderful. That because you got it. You got it, Amanda. When you look at this work, the heat, the reflection of light, and you look at the shoes, and the shoes, if looked at for a moment, start to act like openings, start to act like mouths. And it's that double entendre that I was really interested in, because capture culture created a context that Black people had to operate through once the drums were removed. They had to shapeshift. And so the body became a marker of sound and communication, the very articulation of the body. And then, of course, the sonic sound that uttered this power. And it's this power that I was interested in, because it's which look like voids in one iteration is really important. And I should also say, as I close out on this, is that always art, as I said, looms, because art is always complicit with power. Art has never not been complicit with power. And so Malevich's black square and red square are firmly attached to the souls of this industry, which is capitalism. Now, of course, Malevich was railing against the structures of containment from his point of view. And so Malevich is not a willing participant in how history might use and manipulate his utterances. But power uses whatever it needs or whatever it can to maintain what it has demanded. And so in that way, art plays a deep and important role always in this work. And so these shoes carry some of that.
I think that what you're saying too really resounds with me when I think about the object that you've included to show us that's on the next slide. The idea of the bearing of the Black body, the idea of the sonics of the body, the idea of the way that people carry themselves and present themselves. And so I was curious if you could talk to us a little bit about this and its relationship to that form and the idea of both the positive and negative, the void and the forthcoming.
Now, if you don't, I'm going to try to be fast because we don't have much time.
Okay.
But it's important for me to sort of frame this because this object came from me to me while I was engaged in painting tulips, which were not about flowers. As you can see, that my work is not about ships. So, and when I was looking in a page that I was studying about the slave trade or the Atlantic slave trade, I came upon an object, this object, not this specific one, but an object that this is in the process of, it's in the tradition of. And that is, this object was referred to as a slave collar. And I was attracted to it optically because of the void in the center. And the void in the center reminded me of a body floating in space, and the edges were the shoulders of this form. And I've always been attracted to voids because my study over time of African art, African sculpture, African art, African cosmology has really yielded for me a deep understanding of the significance of the void. And in that context, this object just drug me into its orbit. And so I immediately rushed home and began to explore this form through painting, through just making many, many, many paintings of this object struggle, in space. And one day I was at an African shop where I buy sculpture and various African objects for many years. And I came upon two of these objects and I was floored. So I bought them and I brought them home and I found that they were not slave collars. That is to say, that wasn't their origin. Their origin was really in Africa. Africans made this. They made these and they wore them on their bodies as sonic instruments because they make noise. They have instruments inside those larger areas, and the implement that's inside it crashes on each surface to make a rhythmic sound. And the rhythmic sound is connected to the body and how the body moves. And when the body creates sonic structures that are designed to serve a ritual process, the instrument does what it's doing now to us who look at it. It transforms from an iron thing to a thing that represents a body floating in space. And then it transforms into an instrument of sonic power. And then it transforms again into an object as it is taken across the Atlantic, into an object of punishment and ridicule. This object is a profound image of the history of a psychosis. This form brought into the new world is representative of the thinking that's in that world. And the thinking that's in that world is the use of an individual for purposes of economic gain. And so any instrument, not an instrument used for its original purposes, which is spiritual attainment, but an instrument that becomes an instrument of subjugation. Now, that is not based on the instrument, but the mind of where that instrument is located. And so the void recontextualized, marked Black thought for me, because it's in that space, the space that Sun Ra articulated when he said space is the place between your ears, because it's your mind that you got to get clear. And once your mind is clear, your body will follow. And so resistance is inside that void. And that's why the void did exactly the opposite from what the capture culture intended that image to do. It empowered Black thought. It didn't deny and diminish Black thought. And so that's why that object became profoundly important for me to get inside of. I'm sorry, I took a little longer.
Are you kidding? Go forever. I think it's fascinating too that you use this quote, this idea of space as the place. As I was walking through your show, I kept thinking about that. And so I went back and watched it, and I was struck by this statement: your music too, you're all instruments. Everybody's supposed to be playing their part.
That's right. Your tune. You know, there's a thing in Black music that musicians, because when I was a student in college, I was sitting in that Black room, peered deeply into that blue glow on the wall, serving to me these extraordinary, great white geniuses, mostly male. And I was always interrupting, saying, have there ever been any Black artist that ever did anything? No, was the refrain. Art is about quality, not about politics. Well, I heard this from the time I was in high school to the time I graduated from college in 1972. And so in that way, I became absolutely fixed on finding, as I was being taught, parallels, equivalences, and I could find it without refute in music, Black musicians. Now, no doubt, this is what high art is. You can't deny Bessie Smith. You could not utter a argument that Billie Holiday is not the beginning and ending. There is no possible way you could deny Thelonious Monk or Miles Dewey Davis as not being geniuses. How you gonna do that? So now I got an equivalent for every white boy you bring. I got an equivalent, and they taught me to pay deep attention to the creative process. And part of the creative process was ruthless. Now, we don't deal with that in a modern context, and I understand it. But at that time, in the 1960s, when you played like somebody else, the first thing is, okay, you can get off the stage because you're just playing me or somebody else. Your job, if you want to be in this, is to find you. When you find you, when you bring you, then we'll pay attention, because you will demand we pay attention by what you bring. And that's how greatness emerges. Through you. From you, everything and every human being is a tuning. And it's your job to get as much information so you can tune up. And that is what musicians taught me.
I don't even know how to move on, move on from something like that. I'm so moved. But let's go to the next slide so we can see you showing up and you, Eleanor, one back. Perfect. You taking then this void and moving it into your own life. This is a drawing that you sent to me and Eleanor, and so we see the collar at the bottom marked in red. And then atop it, it's a hoodie. And this has been the subject of a huge number of your paintings, or if not a subject, then a character in a huge number of your paintings. And it's interesting to me that you talk about the resistance inside the void, because of course, right when you were starting to work with the hoodie, hoodies were also understood as gestures of defiance. The way to avoid the surveillance state is to put your hood up and not to be recognized in order to travel as yourself. So talk to us about this then.
There you go. Could you go to the slide right after this first? I'm going to get right to it.
Yeah. But
I have to give you this image, because this image is connected to what you just showed. This work is work that came out of those explorations of this object, which I found in the early 90s. And so this is a reflection of some music that I'd been listening to in the late 60s, early 70s. And I listen to it frequently, even now. And it was of the Chicago Art Ensemble. And the Chicago Art Ensemble had a record called Certain Blacks. Certain blacks do what they wanna. Certain blacks groove on love. Certain blacks do what they wanna. Now that do what they wanna always stuck with me because it meant they were liberated. Could we go back to that other slide, please? Thank you. So it meant that they were liberated. And Black people have always, from my experiences, had to cloak in the United States. They had to cloak. And when I saw my children cloaking, at first I admonished them because I knew the cloak that they had adopted would get them killed. And I knew also that myself as a youth cloaked. My father cloaked. My father cloaked in zoot suits. I cloaked in Ben Davis and Levi jeans, creased so hard that they cut your legs with starch in them. Slit on the side so they'd break at your foot. This was a early 1960s look. It connected me as I was trying to figure out who I was in junior high school to a community so that I could shape my personality, my way of being in the world as an adolescent. And therefore, I acquired a walk, how I was going to take space as Dewey Crumpler, because that's a space shaping time. Everybody takes their shape. Everybody uses space to articulate their being in the world in that moment. And so my children were in that state. And one of them's room was in horrific shape. And I, as a father, did what my parents did to me. Get your ass in here and clean this up. Excuse my language. And as I was coming out, he had thrown his hoodie against the wall. And that forceful, quipping dad broke apart in trying to understand what I was looking at as it was hanging on that chair. And it looked like it had a body in it when it was actually empty. And I had been exploring that image, trying to figure out why that form made that shadow and what the shadow was. Why was the shadow like that? Why did it have a hole in it? And what is it I could use to understand what form would make that shadow? What form would make that shadow? And that's when I came, after running down into my studio and figuring out how that hoodie would make this shadow. And I understood it because the pockets, and Black folks, not all Black folks, I want to be real clear. I'm not making a pejorative statement here. Not all Black folks do any of this, but the Black folks I was interested in, they did this. They put their hands in their pockets, and the hands spread out the hoodie. And for me, that made that wider section. And then the opening is actually the hood, because the hoodie, as you point out, has this ability to act in the resistance that you create. And because that cloaking is necessary in a culture that wants to define you in its way, it wants to square you up when you are fully rounded. And in the culture markers that define you, hipness is a very important character. You know, Robert Farris Thompson wrote about this idea of the African cool. It's essential because it becomes a framework of resistance, space taking. When you are in a capture culture, your mission is to get out of it, and therefore you cloak in order to create something around you that puts you in opposition to this demand on your spirit to be little, not huge. And African thought is huge, never small. It gets small too when it wants to be. But its aspiration is, like all human beings, for the highest state of consciousness. And that's what interests me, that higher state of consciousness. And that's what that form was revealing. And so I wanted, in the name of this process, let whatever comes out of this form do what they wanna, do what they wanna. That was that.
It's wonderful to think too about Robert Farris Thompson writing about African sculpture and noting that so many of the sculptures that depict elders or kings or spiritual leaders actually have their lips closed, right? Because they don't have to speak. They are the cool, right? And so they are able then to embody whatever the spirit is that they are meant to embody. And so I'm seeing this here in this void that's also not a void in your hoodies, right? It is a shadow, it is a recession, but also it is the darkest thing on this piece of paper, right? And so it's also the thing that might move forward. And so it therefore embodies as well this own form of personal architecture.
Wow. Yes, this darkness is really lightness, because blackness is illumination, a different kind of illumination than the light. But the light comes through the blackness, not the other way around. Blackness is potentiality. The universe is not dark matter, black matter. And it's that black matter that tools and expands the universe. For as far as consciousness can see, for as far as the Hubble will look into time, it will find blackness. And blackness is the very dot in the universe of universes that is unattainable, because it is constantly in a reshaping modality. And that's why you have to cloak in your mind to come close to perceiving it. And that's why the Buddha closes his eyes, and in that deep recession, time and space evaporates, because they are in a place of no place. And that's the place we seek to recreate ourselves. That's why the Blackness is essential. And sometimes the hoodies reflect, open, and show the universe within.
I'm thinking of another quote from Space is the Place. We work on the other side of time.
That's it. That's it. That's it. I'm glad you read all that. Because, hey, Sun Ra was another one of them missionaries beamed down on a lightning bolt, a momentary visitor. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Dewey, why don't we move through some of the images from your Derek Eller show?
Yes, please.
So that we can see how the hoodie takes shape in your work.
Great.
So these are install shots at first from Derek Eller. And again, this is open through the end of this week. So run, don't walk to see this if you haven't been yet. It's truly one of the remarkable shows that you're going to see this year. So we want to talk about color, your palette, but yeah. I also want to ask you too, since you acknowledge Duchamp throughout this exhibition, how does the hoodie work as a ready-made for you?
Well, it is a ready-made. The hoodie came out of a sweatshirt that got a hood placed on it. And many Black athletes in the 50s and 60s, or in the 60s primarily, began to adorn the hoodie because it was another marker of hip to wear it. It did all the things it needed to do, but it gave you anonymity when you needed it. It created a shadow across your head. It made it possible for you to sink in to space, your space, and then poke out into the world. So it had this shifting quality, and it could contain energy inside of it, like a kind of mummified cloak where it is, as the Amun-Ra energy wrapped in matter. And so the energy is contained, and the sweat of its energetic pulsing winds up perfuming the garment, permitting it to cool you down. So in that way, the hoodie became a transmission vehicle of a certain kind of stance. It transmitted how you could be in the world. And other people like this. They use this, they pick this up. And so just like in that picture, the hoodie is a revealer, you know, like an avatar that moves in between the universe and the earthly realm. And they can do it at will. In fact, they can expand as huge as the universe, or as small as a microbe that can go inside the synaptic tissue of the brain. And in this case, I was interested in the rabbit duck phenomena of perception. You know, what is a hoodie? Who is a Klansman or a Klansperson? What is the tradition? How far back does it go? And so I dropped one of the hoods onto the floor, and it took on the form of a rabbit duck. When you see the rabbit, it's no longer a duck. You can never not see the rabbit. When you see a Klans person, they don't have to wear a Klan uniform. They can be in a suit, which is the normal uniform of today's Klan. They don't operate in that structure. And so when you look at the painting in the background of Philip Guston's hoodie figure, what is it that makes Philip Guston's painting untenable in a world where Philip Guston has as much of a right to critique the Klan as anybody else? Because when those goons were marching through the streets yelling, "Jews will not replace us," this is a madness song. And it's one that everybody in the country ought to be nervous about. And you should measure what your ideas are about that as much as you measure these garments and who is painting what. So the hoodies often take on ideas when they come, so that they reveal something as they make visits. I'm sorry, I went a little long there.
That's all right. No, I like the idea of them being malleable, that they're not rigid and therefore breakable, right? But rather they're cloth and soft and therefore are able to offer protection, but also be form-fitting to the person. Yeah.
To whatever the occasion is.
Yes. Yes. I love the way too that they and Duchamp's fountain exchange positions, and again, here's that parabola shape, right, or your bell curve shape.
Yes.
They become each other. They become the Buddha. They become the lingam.
That's right.
You know, they can become the Madonna and Child, as one person described the fountain. And so they have this shape-shifting ability that
That's
is
right.
all opportunity.
That's right. In one painting that I had, that, you know, there are many hoodie paintings, but in one, the hoodie, which has taken over a museum, gets inside of the urinal and takes a Buddha pose, because the urinal is shaped like the shape of a Buddha too. And it has become the Buddha of modernism. And we all make pilgrimages to stand outside of the case in which the Buddha has been contained, a secular God. And so, as Nietzsche articulated, God is dead. And whenever you create a vacuum, human beings need another filling to take its place. And the urinal in modernism became that holy grail, that holy relic that help to shape the ideology that serves our present. The Demoiselle d'Avignon served a modern world governed by the Industrial Revolution, still fixed in colonialism. But once colonialism was over and the world had to adjust to the conditions of the New World Order, colonialism, like all powers, never give up. Power, like Newton's articulation of the macrocosmos, a body tends to remain at rest until acted upon by another body of equal or greater mass. And our great Frederick Douglass brought that into view by paraphrasing it with, power concedes nothing but to a demand it never has and it never will. And so in that context, power had to regroup. And that's why, again, soft power could reaffirm its power. And art becomes an absolute necessity when it's not land you're after any longer, but heads. As I said, where the heads go, the bodies follow.
We're looking at your Demoiselle d'Avignon painting right now, just so for those of you who didn't catch the reference here.
Thank you.
One of the things that Eleanor and I wanted to ask you about was your palette. And as I was walking through the show, I told you this already, I was first struck by this green that shows up everywhere. And I've started thinking about it as dewy green. But I also think, I was thinking too about an artist statement that Odile Odita wrote about how his work is color that is in the whiteness of the gallery space, and the importance of the idea of color also as defiance, as resistance. And I'm curious about that from you. Can you talk to us about color in your palette?
Well, I agree with Odetta. Absolutely. Color is a psychic adjustment vehicle. You know, color has a psychological impact on human consciousness. And as you manipulate color, it becomes fixed. You know, Johns made an interesting color framework when he, not an experiment, but a color dialogue when he painted a field of gray and green, black, and colors that when you focused in on them, your retina is adjusted to that vibratory quality, and then it reflects into the colors of the American flag. So psychically, conceptually, this is an important aspect that color always delivers. Color is an essential framework, and an understanding of color is absolutely a tool for a maker. And so color in these paintings are really adjusted based on the needs of the hoodies, who I very often have no capacity to determine often I don't know what they're going to do, but I do know that that green that everyone always asks me about is the only color they will show up in. I've tried many other colors, but whenever I use other colors, they don't show up. Green has to be there. It's a kind of oxygen, a kind of radiating energy that they bring with them, and they, like us in outer space, have to have the cleansing of oxygen to permit our bodies to do what they do. And this is a kind of regenerative kind of color. It's a kind of Osirian green in the sense that it's a regeneration property. It's a property that gives them animated control and power over their environment. And if they come, it will come. So that's all I can say about it. I really, I've been looking at it since I first started these things in the early 90s, and I still have, I'm trying to figure it out.
Well, I need to tell you that as you were speaking to me on my Zoom screen, your little image is surrounded by dewy green, letting me know that you're the one speaking to me. I just took a screenshot for you so I can email it to you.
Wonderful.
Later.
Thank you.
It's like a halo.
Oh, that's so wonderful.
Dewey, I'm going to stop here so that our participants can ask you questions too. Thank you. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time.
Thank you so much for permitting me to do this.
Thank you so much, Dewey. That was incredible. Thank you so much, Amanda.
Yes, thank you.
Really been just an absolutely mind-blowing conversation. I'm so honored to have been able to witness it and to have everybody here to listen as well. We do have a bunch of audience questions. I'm going to start with GE. GE, you should be able to unmute now and ask your question.
Thank you very much, Eleanor, Amanda, and Dewey. And Dewey, thank you so much for evoking Bob Kaufman and all these wonderful giants that we all
yes.
need. Everybody.
Yes.
Our ensemble of Chicago, all of them. Thank you.
Great.
Roscoe Mitchell was here today. Everybody.
Oh, absolutely. They're there.
Absolutely. So my question is, the spiritual aggressiveness, it's essential. Is it essential to work in the art? Because if we don't recognize the spiritual battle without being aggressive, it's easy to become a casualty.
That's a great way. Yeah. See, I to have a spiritual stance is a necessity. I don't believe in, the modernist notion of spiritual spookiness. I believe that spiritual, to be focused deeply on the thing you're doing and do it at the highest level you are capable of, is a spiritual commitment. And that takes persistence. You don't just get up and float into a state of consciousness that makes, you have to work in a culture that gives not one damn about who you are as a maker, doesn't give one damn about what you make until you become famous and important. So you have to rise to the capacity that you aspire to. And And, you know, that is exactly, it's an aggressive act. Black people had to be spiritually aggressive. When you are dealing with psychosis and the psychotic condition wants to deny you being as a human being, and you refuse it, you say, no, I am a spiritual being, and to demonstrate it, I will focus in on my spiritual being, and I'll create a sound so powerful that it will cut through your psychosis. And that's precisely what they did. They created a sonic vibration inside a box called a church that came out of the forest where they first came into contact with that process in the 1619. And then they created a sonic weapon, and they brought that weapon through refinement in a crucible for 350 years. Now, that's spiritual aggression. You got to go to work, and you have to be unwilling to see anything but the piercing light that the clarity of your conviction makes possible. And that is what invigorates me. That is what I have become a part of, that tradition. That's a tradition, as Amiri Baraka said. And that's a tradition I embrace. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, GE.
Yeah.
We're going to pass it over to Raven now for a question.
Hello. I wanted to ask, do you feel like the void that you're attracted to in your work is also an allegory for the void in the history and identities of Black Americans?
You know, it depends on how you're thinking about this void, because for me, the culture, if you're, and you can correct me, but if implied in your question is the culture that surrounds Black being in the United States over the hundreds of years that we've been here, that there's been an attempt often to void our presence visually, and even attempt that psychically, that for a very long time we were voided and shaped in the form of the psychosis that capture culture attempted to frame us in. But the void is a dynamic space. And I think Black people stepped into that void and created their own relationship to it, so that the forces that tried to erase their being was never successful. Because, if I might, to your very important question, say that the sonic force presence, because visual presence is one kind of being, but You can be absent physically, but present in every sense of the word through what your sonics has created. Black thought has changed the world. Everywhere Black bodies took space, they changed the space. Everywhere. And that change is permanent. When Blacks came to the New World, they changed how the New World operated in relationship to the peoples who were already there. When Black people came into the visual space, they even denied that. Blacks have never capitulated. Even when they became minstrels, they reshaped minstrelsy so that minstrelsy carried the double entendre that their African sensibilities brought with them. And therefore, even minstrelsy got shifted by Blacks who spoke double entendre through that miserable, horrible condition. So don't be fooled by the void, or don't be fooled by absence. Absence is also presence. And your presence is in things when you're not even there. No American walks the same or talks the same because Black sonics changed their cadences, changed the way they brought European music. Ask Stravinsky. Ask Stravinsky. Ask Dvorak. Ask John Cage. No matter where you have been, you have brought change, just like every other group of human beings in the world. I hope I did answer part of your question.
You did, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Raven. For our final question, we'll turn it over to our very own Fawn.
Thank you, Eleanor. Can you guys hear me okay? Can you hear me okay? Is it better now?
Yes, yes.
Eleanor. Thank you. There's some technicality there. You know, as Immanuel Kant once said, Dewey, from the crooked timber of humanity, nothing ever came out straight. Thank God.
There you go, Bo.
Yeah, you absolutely right, Dewey, about ask Stravinsky. And I would say ask Bob Dylan about Blind Boy Fuller. Ask Keith Richards about the great Robert Johnson. Ask Eric Burton about Booker White. It go on forever. Yes, indeed.
Yes,
Dr.
sir.
Blue Master. Yes, indeed. So yes, listen to you talking. I think everyone here acknowledged that we all mesmerized, and I can't help but this is like a minister of Black theology par excellence, singing the tune of inner freedom like Dr. King. You know, when was it? August in 1963, given the I Have a Dream speech with 250,000, much larger than those who showed up at the minuteness of former President Trump's inauguration. But listen to you talking about you know, art, and I can't help but to think also of, believe it or not, the joy of painting, Bob Ross. I
Yes,
love Bob
yes,
Ross.
yes.
I love Bob Ross, miss him. But
Yes.
thank you so much, the beautiful show.
Thank
And
you, Phone.
come see it because it's you know, you live the life. You live the life when someone asks Charlie Parker, how would you describe jazz in one sentence? Just before he died. It's easy, man, he said. If you don't live it, it won't come out your horn. So I think the show is the testament of your whole life practice, Dewey. So congratulations.
Thank you, Phone.
For coming on, talking to Amanda. It's such a beautiful conversation, and I can't wait when I make the portrait. I re-listen to it, and then again, you all go see the show. It's a fantastic show, and stay as long as you can. Go second time, I would suggest it. And yeah, more power to you, Brother Dewey.
Brother Phone, I thank you in the deepest way. And you have been an inspiration through these difficult times. And out of great difficulty can come great opportunity. And you have created a great opportunity for all of us out here who have really paid attention to the contribution that you, Amanda, Nick, everybody at the rail has made possible. I want to salute all of you. I am humbled in your great contribution to our history. So thank you, Fong. Thank all of you. And I really appreciate this opportunity you've provided me.
We too, Dewey. We too. I think that's exactly what we are doing here. This is what the Tocqueville called the art of joining. This is what make American, in spite of its terrible flaws and imperfection, it's required people coming together like we are now. So
that's right.
Thank you for your brotherhood, for your commitment to art and culture, and thank you for being part of our art of joining. And again, we're here in order to advocate for Dewey. Live commitment as a painter. So talking is a very important part of it. But when do you see the show, how it's made, what the images evoke, and that's exactly what we're here to do. So congratulations again. Go see the show. Congratulations. Thank you, those who put this thing together at the gallery, at Derek Elder Gallery. And thank you, Amanda, for being who you are. Commander-in-Chief, Field Marshal, all of it on the front. And thank you for all you coming, joining Dewey and Amanda and all of us today. Thank you so much. In solidarity, and back to you, Eleanor.
Thank you, Fong. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Fong. Thank you, Dewey. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. I'm now thrilled to turn it over to our Poet Laureate of the Day, Keith Donnell Jr. We are so lucky to have Keith here to close our program today, as is our tradition for all of our community events. Keith Donnell Jr. is a Bay Area-based poet and book editor. He earned his MFA in creative writing at San Francisco University, and his work has appeared in journals and anthologies, including Poetry Magazine, Cagibi, hope I said that one right, Puerto del Sol, and Best American Nonrequired Reading. His first collection, The Move, from Nomadic Press, was released in fall 2021. Thank you for being here, Keith, and I'm thrilled to pass the mic to you.
Hey, thank you. Y'all, can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. So before I read, I just want to just say how much I appreciate y'all including me in this really phenomenal event. Dewey, just hearing you, talk through your process You know, your work and your intentions through your work was really inspiring. So I'm gonna just read one poem. It's called Eulogy delivered by Ozzy Davis at the funeral of Malcolm X. And it's after the actual, you know, eulogy that Ozzy Davis delivered. This final hour, this quiet place, alarm has come. Dim lit stairwell, torn from it, searing eye test, smoke, hope, cope, extinguished, no wind, gone with us forever. 4 alarm down here. We were kids wandering, strung lead and fog, our home of bones, where his heart was and where his people are still. Runaways out in the woods again. The reforms lost footing, that were meat once again in alarm to shard these last monuments. Rhythm, 4 alarm, lost cause punchlines, a sewer bin grace used to those who crossed air, full vote. He ran, dove, defended air, donners, bones and buttons, fragments eaten to the death. Dark nights in the memory of man, fortunes faked, but nonetheless proud, still braver, more gallant young shams, peons. Then this here brother laid out before us now, so bright, shining, and beautiful, so holy before sun, conquered stale eyes. Say the word again. Yeah, that's what I thought. Wood ash wants me too. Afro Amor icon, Afro Amori kin, was a mass tear to wash my stem, us, too cool, alive in words, no known bodies returned, a knee to power, wars galore, half off all remains of men. Runaways out in the woods again. Malcolm had stopped being a Negro years ago. It had become too small, too puny to wreck a word form. No, no, no. Malcolm was badder than that. Malcolm had become aggro, a field again. And he wanted soul disparity that all his people came to. The roar of those who wall, consider it their duty. Still, we laugh, we eat, we've grown down. To revive him, prisons of memory, to save ourselves by riding harm out of history, of our turbulent times. Capital will ask what alarm fires to budget cut in this stormy, controversial, and bold young crap's hand, and we wall miles. Many would wall sister away. Frame this man, for he is not a man, but tandem, a sermon, a subverter, no anomaly, all that rumble, young man rumbling, and we wall miles. They'll say he was half ape, an old attic slave, quite musty and sun-kissed, whole cannon liberating evil, and to dwell and smear and dismay. Delude no tattoos, my brother. Elude never God's touch. Humor? Have harm smile at you. Did you ever really glisten to him? Did he ever do a mean thing? Wash me over for him sale. Assassinated with violin since at any public disco dance, for if you do you, were now him, and you, if you truly knew harm, you, widow, wide, we missed so near him. Malcolm was our human donor, our loving main back road. This was his meaning to his people, and in honoring him, we honor the blast out of ourselves. The brother surely slayed is almost dead, and we lack a much braided rope. Consign these mortal remains to earth, our common mother and fall, seeking core in the knowledge that who they mace, pin to ground, ice no more, not never, amen, but acid wash. Walls came forth again, to us, dust, and we will know him then for what he was and is, a brick, our own black shining brick, who didn't hesitate to fly because he loved us so. Thank you.
Woo. Lord have mercy.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Keith.
Woo.
That was an incredible reading.
Woo.
And once again, thank you, Dewey and Amanda. And we would also like to thank Sky and the extended Derek Eller team for helping to make today's incredible event possible. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. Thank you again, Dewey and Amanda. It was a great afternoon. We encourage everyone to view our archive of these conversations on our YouTube channel, where we will upload today's conversation shortly. And please do join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for our 82nd Radical Poetry reading with Ostap Kim, Ilya Kaminsky, Zavina Orlovsky, Max Rosachinsky, Yuba Yakimchuk, and it's going to be a great afternoon tomorrow as well. You can now turn on your microphones to say hello and goodbye as you leave. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
so
It
much,
was
Dewey.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Incredible reading. Thank you, Dewey. Thank
So
you.
much, Dewey.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Vaughn. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you,
Great poem,
Derek.
Keith.
Thank you,
Really
Derek.
enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye, Dewey.
Thank you all so much.
Bye.
Hey, Dewey, take care.
Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, you all.